Hi guys, welcome to week 3 of Debating Capitalism. And in week 3, we look at the very important area of national growth. What is the capitalist mindset or framework towards nations achieving national economic and other forms of growth? And is that relevant, is that not relevant, right? So as usual, we'll start with what is the capitalist free market narrative. And as has been consistent throughout, capitalist free market narrative is more openness, will equals more growth, right? And the narrative is simple, that if your economy is more open, then you'll get more trade, then you attract more investment, then you allow individuals to create business, right? To be entrepreneurs. I think that's spelling for entrepreneurs, but you get the point. Okay, so all of these things then combined together will develop the economy. Right? So then money will go up. As one of my friends put it before, right? So that's the free market narrative. And the answer then, therefore, to developing countries is to do these things. Okay, so how can developing countries develop? By doing these things. And we've seen that in the past. We've seen international organizations like the IMF or the World Trade Organization, or countries that when they give aid will tie them to these sorts of policies, right? So they say like, IMF will say you should restructure, you should open your economy, you should encourage more businesses to come in, reduce tariffs, get rid of subsidies, and then growth will come, right? And to some extent, that's worked in some places, but in other places, it hasn't really worked, okay? So the narrative, then the counter narrative to this approach is that too much openness doesn't give space for the local economy or industries to develop. Just like we discussed previously with companies, that companies can't compete on equal footing with other companies if their company doesn't have a protected period of growth. And the same thing applies to these national economies. So I wouldn't say anti-free market economists, but ones that cast a little doubt on the free market, religion, says that protectionism is cool. Okay, I know it's a scary word, because it conjures up images of communists and Stalin. But the truth is that many developing countries, in fact, some would argue all developing countries, except maybe like a few like Holland, had a long history of protectionism, right? And even maintain protectionism to this day. So they protect their companies, they protect the intellectual property in their countries, they protect their workers, they protect everything in their countries, and they only open up when they can, when their economy, when their market is strong, right? So America wants to open up more and more especially in industries and sectors where they are considered strong, and therefore push others to open. But America still heavily protects its labor industry, it protects its agricultural industry with huge amounts of subsidies, right? And occasionally, when certain industries don't do very well, they will step in and protect it, right? Because it's politically more sound and feasible for them to do that, right? Because they can't lose out at the expense of other people. So the people on the other side of the spectrum say that protectionism is natural, right? It's cool. It's happened in history. If you look at how every country developed. And they argue that developing countries need to protect their economies, right? They need to keep it a little bit closed in order to give them some space to develop, right? And then later on they can open up. But of course, the problem with this is how close should it be? How long do you need to keep it closed? At which point do you open up? You don't open up, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I guess the answer is somewhere in between. At some point, more openness is good. The question is, at which point, and how do you get to that point, right? And of course, there are other issues of government involvement, and if you can't trust the government, or if the government's corrupt, then will an open market be better or a protected market be better? and so on and so forth. And it may differ based on the type of industry and the type of country, etc., etc. But at the high level, the split is the same like it is in every capitalism debate. The more open on one side will lead to more growth. On the other side, you argue that you need things to be a little bit more closed. And then you filter down from there, right? So more open means more investment, more competition. More closed means more protection, more stability. Okay? So let's get into a few topics. We can understand this a little bit better. So these are the three issues that we picked for this week. Let's go through them in turn. So the first one is about whether or not developing countries should raise the minimum wage, right? So the tension here is on creating more protection. So creating more protection for that economy. The minimum wage is a form of labor protection. In the higher, just like with any kind of labor law, right? That if you have a law that says companies can't hire people who don't have degrees, or companies have to, have pay retirement or pensions to workers, all those things is a form of protectionism because it reduces the freedom of companies. And free market capitalists will argue that also stunts the flexibility of that economy, right? So if there's no minimum wage, then I can pay lower wages and become more competitive. But there's a natural check and balance because people will then, if other companies want talented workers, they will pay more, and then labor can move around, right? So from a full free market perspective, wage controls are a bad idea, or at least you want to keep them as low as possible, just to create like a real bottom blanket and not raise them any higher, right? So that would be the free market approach here. You don't want to raise the wage, you want to keep it, or but keep it low, okay? Or have none at all. And then you argue that the market can correct itself, right? Classic capitalist argument. And you argue that it gives more freedom to workers to choose their jobs. You can also argue how it can be counterproductive if you raise it, because minimum wage only applies to permanent full-time employees. How a lot of companies get past a lot of these regulations is they don't hire people permanently. They only hire them as part-time. So even if you raise the wage, it may mean less full-time workers and less people who will benefit from this higher minimum wage, right? On the other side, you say that we need a kind of balanced development. Having too low minimum wage leads to countries getting trapped into a low labor trap, where companies only want to come in because of their low wages. And because people get low wages, they can't develop, right? It's harder for me to buy houses and buy stuff, but it's also harder for me to invest and save and to improve myself, to get a degree, or to improve the lives of my children. And so I get trapped into this very high labor-intensive kind of work that doesn't pay me a lot of money, and the next generation does the same thing, and so on and so on and so on. And one way to overcome this is to raise the wage, which will force companies to be more productive in some other way rather than just hiring labor. And that's how companies work. If it costs less to hire, 10 people, then I'll hire 10 people. I don't need to get a machine. But if, it costs more to hire 10 people, and I can only hire like 5, then maybe a machine is cheaper, so I will get a machine. And those 5 people get more money because the wage is higher, and they get more productive. And then later I can hire more and hire more and hire more, right? So that's the argument you make on the other side. You show how you try to take a moral high ground a little bit, and show how it's going to help the country develop in the long term. It's more sustainable. And show how companies will cope. They're not all going to run away, and it forces them to be more productive. Okay, so that's the debate about raising the minimum wage. Okay, keep in mind, this is about try to take a national growth perspective and ensure you talk about the capitalist principles. The second debate we're going to discuss in more detail. So I'll take a look at the third one, that development aid should not be tied to free market policies, right? So this is pretty straightforward. Free market policies are lowering tariffs. This will be something that you need to discuss, right? How do you define these free market policies? No protections, right? So which are the tariffs? No subsidies, right? Deregulation, break monopolies. All of these things are free market policies. So the pro side will show how these things will open up the economy, make it more active, that currently there's no incentive for the government to do that because the governments benefit or the leaders benefit from all of these things, but the leaders want the aid, so use the aid as an incentive to break it apart. And when it's broken apart, the people will benefit, right? Because the wealth then will be shared more equitably among all the people, okay? That's the pro-capitalist approach. The anti one is that which here will be the Gov side, is that these free market policies harm the economy, that they don't give the local industry time to develop. They don't give the banking sector, the automotive sector, the healthcare sector, any of these sectors, the agricultural sector, manufacturing, textiles, etc., time to develop because you're forcing them to, open up these, remove tariffs, remove protection, remove subsidies. And that means that foreign companies will come in and buy up all of this stuff and then take control. And maybe there will be some investment, but it will be very kind of minimal investment. And these countries become production hubs. They're not the ones that are generating their own content, their own knowledge, their own ideas. And this is bad because, firstly, you get mostly low labor, low value products, right? Or you're at the low value end of the product supply chain. Okay, so at the part which you just manufacture, and the profit margins are very, very low. You make more money if you are the one who has the brand, if you are the one who has the design, you are the one who is creating the product, right? So it's like Apple and iPhones. The iPhones are made all around the world, mostly in China and Taiwan, but they're designed in California and in America. And the people who design them, who own the copyrights over them, who market and sell them, make a lot of the money. But the people who do all the work in building them and putting them together make money, but very little amounts of money, right? So the Taiwanese manufacturers who used to build all these phones are now trying to make their own phones. So you have Asus and HTC and all these other guys because it makes more money for them to do that rather than make phones for other people. Okay, so that's the first thing. But secondly, you need to have local companies because those companies are invested. And we go back again to the companies thing they were doing before. They're less likely to leave if things get bad. They're more likely to use local talent, more likely to hire people, more likely to invest locally in the economy rather than another company, a foreign company is using it as a development hub, right? So the development aid should not do things and make it harder for that industry or that company to build in the long term. Development aid needs to focus on building infrastructure, needs to help the country develop, right? Infrastructure here can be hard infrastructure, can be soft infrastructure too. And soft means like talent, education, etc. All of those different things, right? Now, you do these things, and then the country is going to be able to build their own corporate giants, and then it will open up, right? But now you shouldn't do that, okay? So it depends. On the other side, you'll come back and say like, no, those two things are not mutually exclusive. They can happen together. These other companies can work together with them. The development aid will still come in and build these things. If the development aid, if these free market policies are not put in place, the development aid will end up being wasted because companies that are protected can be very sloppy and, because there's no competition. So it's okay if I make loss after loss after loss. I still get subsidies from the government. I become very, very inefficient, right? So it's a classic battle. The more open, the more competitive, the more efficient the industry will become. And donors like that and are more likely to give money. But high efficiency, high competition means very short-term thinking and very short-term growth, but in the long term, very little local growth and like no, champions. Okay? So that's the clash there. Very brief, I know, but I hope that's enough for you to build a basis. Let's get in depth then. If you want depth, I'll give you some depth. This house believes that developing countries should extend the option of permanent residency rights to foreign students who successfully complete an education in their country. Right. So, how should we set this debate up? I think the important thing to define is PR rights. What do you mean by permanent residency? And what you want to say is not citizenship, about the right of somebody to work freely in any industry, right? So they don't need to get a foreign worker visa. Because the issue in this debate is that it's companies who want to get talented workers needs to apply for very specific visas for those workers. And that's a burden, right? That's a barrier to get for those workers. It's a barrier for the company and it's a barrier for the workers, okay? So for example, let's say you study in America, right? You do a degree at a reputable university and you work there for 4 years. Then after that, you graduate, you want to get a job in America, you become a foreign foreign citizen. Once your student visa expires, you have to go home, right? Even though you stayed there for 4 years, there's no advantage to you other than what the company wants to give you, right? Maybe a small advantage, but not really. You still have to compete with anybody else who graduated outside the country. Now, if an employer wants to hire you, they need to apply for a special visa. If you want to get there, it becomes much harder for you too, because you need to jump through more hoops. So this means that even though you are a little bit more talented and better suited for the company, you're not that much more better talented and suited that the company is willing to go through so much more effort to hire you, right? So if you were a local, they would have hired you. If you had the right to work there, they would have hired you. And if they could, it'll be better for the company, it'll be better for you. But you're not a local, so it's much harder to hire you. So I'd rather hire someone who's like 10 or 15% less talented than you, but saves me more trouble. And trouble which I can't afford. Maybe money that I can't afford, or staffing that I can't afford. Or it's just too much trouble, right? Why don't I just get this other guy who's like maybe 10% less qualified, but still it's 90% there that's pretty useful, and that's all I need for now, right? So that's essentially what this debate is about. On the government side, you're arguing that open this up, you'll get good people, and that will be great for the developing and the developed country, right? Remember, we're talking about development kind of perspective and from a free market perspective, right? And so you want to be more open. You want to be pro-immigration. You want to be pro-free market. And you talk about how this will help the developing world and the developed world, right? By creating a more exhaustive, more competitive market. Because one area where all developed markets protect a lot is their labor. Okay, so the reason why first world employees get paid a lot more is because there isn't that much competition, and one of the reasons why, and because there isn't that much foreign labor. But if there is a lot more foreign labor, that will really push down prices and allow that market then to become more effective, right? Because if I'm paying people less, I can produce more, I can become more productive. At least that's the capitalist kind of the free market approach, okay? So that's your setup from the Gov side. Let's go down and look at arguments. I've outlined 3 on the perspective of the developed countries, perspective of the developing countries, and perspective of the individual. Very organized, right? Developing countries, I argue that you need talent. These guys or girls have studied there for a long time. They are highly qualified. They're also, so we'll say qualified. You establish this very clearly, right? They're not forced to hire them. They can choose. This gives companies more choices. They're also more diverse because they're from different countries. They have different skills. It's a wider skill set. And this will help these companies enter emerging markets. If a company can hire Koreans or Indians or Brazilians, then it becomes easy for that company to sell things to those markets later and to export stuff. So it's fantastic, right? If they have the ability to do this. And in many developed countries, you have shrinking populations, shrinking growth. So a large part of the growth is through immigration, and this is a great way to do it, okay? Secondly, you can also, I put the whole free market pushing down labor cost things here, but if you want, you can also put this argument here, right? That it makes the developed countries' labor markets more competitive, right? Because now there's more competition. So people who were getting paid a lot just because there weren't that many options now end up getting paid less. And this may suck for those people who are getting paid less, but it would improve the productivity of the market as a whole. Because now the companies can do a lot more. They have more talented people working for them and paying them all less than what they were paying them before. Okay, so this is trying to take a bit of a big picture view about the benefit of increased competition, which is what people will do when they support the capitalist philosophy. Second argument is on the developing countries, right? And you need to balance both of these things. You can't be too focused on one and not the other, else you're going to lose the moral high ground there. You can argue that developing countries need remittances. Okay, so the people who work will send money home, and that money can help develop that country. Okay, because the people are still kind of connected to the things that are happening in the country. Many of these people also return home after that, right? And that's why they are sending the money, because they have family at home, maybe, their parents, but also, or their wives. But many of these guys also, even if they set up in America, after a while, they move back because they've got a tie, they've got cultural, language, and all of these other things tied back there. And many of them are in a much better position to develop their countries back home after a few years of experience, right? And I think this is a powerful argument, because if I just graduate from university and move back, I don't have any work experience. And yeah, I've learned a lot of things, but I have never applied them locally. So I can't really transfer technology. What I've learned in my 4 years of undergraduate studies, I can actually learn at home. I can watch on videos and learn. But the thing that you can't learn is working in a firm in the first world, right? If I work in the banking industry in London or in Hong Kong for 3 to 5 years, and then I go back home, I'm going to be able to transfer so much more, and I will have networks and people who I really, who I know, who I can then build a business and develop stuff. Okay, so this is a big boost to developing countries. And if you really want to help developing countries, we need to make sure that the people there have a chance to really learn and gain experience. And only then will they be able to transfer networks and transfer technology. Okay, that's how it will help developing countries. Last but not least, it helps the individual. And here you go back again to the whole free market thing. Individuals have the right to do what they can do. And if you give them the maximum freedom, you will get maximum benefit, right? So this is the first part about the right. I've studied in the country for 4 years. I didn't break any of the laws. I've showed that I can be responsible. So I should get this right to, keep staying in the country, to work, to do stuff, right? I've earned it. It's fair, man. It's fair. And not only that, it's going to help, right? So it'll push down labor costs. So the first world can't protect the market. I can contribute stuff to the economy, right? I can become that entrepreneur. Maybe I'll be the next, Facebook or Legbook or whatever guy, right? And then that's going to help the industry develop. And that's going to be good for everyone. Okay? So the third argument focuses on the right and freedom of that individual. That individual has earned that right because they've been there. And in a free market, that's what we should be doing, right? Giving individuals more rights. But also in this free market, we believe that when we give them these rights, they're going to build more businesses, more growth, and that will be helpful for everyone. Okay? So that's the approach you take on this motion on the Gov side. You want more openness because that openness leads to more efficiency in the domestic market. That openness will attract more talent to the domestic market. That openness will help that talent build more things in the emerging markets, right? And that talent will has a right to do all of these things and will grow and will make everybody happy, right? Sounds like a strong case. How do I deal with it? Let me show you. So on op, you're not against talent. You're not against growth. You want people to come, but you want them to apply for visas because you want to be able to control. See, on op, you want control, right? And visas is a form of controlling. So I want to be able to give visas based on what I need, based on my own growth priorities. If I need a lot of engineers, I give visas for engineers. If I need a lot of teachers, I give visas for teachers, right? I don't give open visas because then when they come in, they may get any job and create too much competition in some areas and push down wages there or increase unemployment in another area. And I don't want that, because there's no guarantee that these guys will get jobs in areas that they studied for, right? Just like how even in local graduates who get an engineering degree will come out and do business, right? Or a teaching degree comes out and does design or something else. So if you give a PR and an open PR, I can study language somewhere and then come out and work in agriculture. And I may do it just because I'm willing to work for lower wages. But the local residents can't cope with the lower wages, and then they're going to be unemployed, and that's going to create social problems, right? So I want control, because that's my right, because that leads to more benefits, even if it's a less free economy. And that's a position that you take on all, right? So talk about harms, both for the developed and developing world, although a lot of it will be focused on the developed, and say you're okay with visas, but given by skill, right? So you can use this to take some ground from the Gov team when they talk about lack of labor in certain areas and how we don't have enough engineers or we don't have enough, vacuum cleaner experts, whatever it is. And then you can say, hey, so if you don't have those things, we'll give a visa for that, right? Visa for engineers, visa for doctors, visa for etc., etc., etc. But be careful, because if you give too many of these visas, it will lead still to talent moving from the emerging world to the first world, right? So depending on how much you prioritize the brain drain argument in your case, and I'll get to that later, you have to not rely too much on this, okay? Because otherwise you become very much like the government side. So use this strategically, okay? Stance, human capital, basis of growth. And this is, you're trying to talk about how this human capital is important for the developing world, and how in the developed world, they need to tend and manage the human capital that they already have and not just keep bringing others in, because that's going to harm your local talent pool. Let's get to arguments, my friends. So argument number 1, brain drain. What does this argument mean? This means that there will be a big drain that will suck out all the brains, because the brains in an emerging market, also not the brains, but the brains and those who have the resources, the rich ones, are the ones who will go study overseas, right? You're really smart, you get a scholarship, or you're smart, you get entrance into Harvard, and you go study overseas. And then you get after 4 years, you get like this PR, you'll want to stay there because you'll get a great job. And maybe you say after 5 years, I'll come back. But after 5 years, you get a promotion to get an even better job, right? Or move to another first world market. And then you have a family and they have kids going in that school, and you want your son to go to Harvard too, and your daughter's already doing, some in MIT and etc., etc. You end up staying there and you don't come back, right? And that means that if you had come back, maybe you would be developing stuff in the local market, in your country of birth at home. But instead, you are over there. And maybe you send a little bit of remittances, but it's not compared to you being in your home market, like building companies, working in government. Maybe you could have been president there or something, right? But you're not. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the brain drain, okay? So the most educated will leave, the talent will get sucked away. Just like how wealth was in the past. Right? All the gold, the oil, and also a lot of the people were taken away through colonialism to the first world, and the first world became rich because on the backs of the third world. And now the first world is sucking away more and more and more. And that's what they want to do, and that's wrong. So the developing world will be stuck and will not be able to develop because most of their best and brightest are going to move away and live in a foreign country where things are much better for them. Okay? You can layer this argument, provide a little bit more analysis by saying that this will increase the drive to study overseas and make it really hard for foreign institutions to cope. Because now, even if it costs a lot of money, I feel like I can get a job as long as I graduate. So people will go to do any degree And then after that, just go and look for any job, because it's much better. You'll get paid more working there than working at home. And this means that it's not, you may not end up doing what you studied to do. And if you don't do that, you don't get this transfer of technology, move back and help develop your economy argument. You may end up working in the service sector, working in restaurants, driving taxis, doing all these things because labor wages are high, or even if you'll accept paying a little bit lower, it's still much, much higher than it was at home. And you'll have a better life, right? So it will really create a huge incentive for young people from emerging markets in the developing world, people who could have otherwise contributed to the economy locally, to leave. Okay, and that's bad. You don't like it. You want to control it. So it's bad for the developing world, right? Primarily. Now you also say it's bad for the first world because it creates over competition, right? You say that the developed markets are saturated. What does that mean? That means that too many people there are already trying to compete for these jobs. Okay, this will push down labor costs too much, which means that some of these new guys who are looking for jobs end up getting much lower pay because they're desperate. Maybe they took loans to go study overseas, so now they need to take any job. But this will also then harm the locals, because locals who are expecting to get a decent pay now don't get that pay, and then they are also maybe in debt, and it really harms the stability in their future, which then will harm the stability of that entire market. Okay, so it's bad for locals. It's also bad for foreigners, and that's why the country should have some right to control it. Too much unemployment is bad. It makes people very, very frustrated, and then it can have a big spillover effects. If people study for jobs, don't get those jobs, they still have loans, they can't spend money in the industry, they may end up going bankrupt if they can't service their student debt, and that means that they can't get more loans, they can't get jobs, right? So they end up being unemployed. And then the country needs to take care of that. You have a kind of welfare crisis. So you argue that the developing world, the developed world, or both of them, need to prevent these imbalances. It's good to have talent, but having so much talent competing would create a surplus. And that surplus will have a negative effect on the economy. It's better to say that if you are needed in a specific industry, we'll give you a visa. Otherwise, it's better for you to go back, right? And that will not give people the expectation that they can come in and automatically get a job, which is false, but also harmful for them in the long run, okay? The last argument is we're going to talk about kind of long-term consequences, that this will lead to migration and not really skill building. I think I touched on this a little bit earlier. By giving open PRs, people will take any job, right? So if I study for engineering, and if I can't get an engineering job, I'll work in agriculture, I'll drive taxis, I'll teach, I'll do whatever, because I want to stay in that country, and I've made plans to stay in that country, and I'll be more desperate, right? And that means that I won't get these benefits. The developing world won't get the benefits of my experience working in engineering, and I choose to move back. The engineering company doesn't get the benefits of like diversity and tying into everybody else because I'm not working in my field. Okay, I don't become that professional, right? On how it harms the education sectors, actually harms education sectors back home in the third world because no one wants to study there anymore. Studying overseas is not just a way to get a better education now, but a way to migrate. So I will take any course overseas to migrate, right? This means no one wants to study at home. Why would you study in Malaysia or in China or in, Botswana? Because there's no point. Even if the education's better, after that, if I'm struggling to get a job, I'm better off studying in a poorer standard university overseas if I can immediately get a work PR after that, okay? And that will harm the local education sectors. And you may harm the education sectors overseas because too many people will go there it will become overcrowded. Okay, something I forgot to mention earlier. So in the setup, when you say given an open PR, that PR will have a timeline, right? So you'll have an open PR for like 1 year or 2 years, for example. And if you can't get a job in that time, then you have to go back. And after you get a job, so after for that 2 years or 3 years, then your employer will still need to get a working visa for you. But given that you've worked there for a while, it should be easier for them to do that, right? So you do that to ensure that people can't stay there for like 5, 6, 10 years. And, you know, even though they don't get a job, and that's a way that the proposition team and the government team can control a little bit this whole huge labor crunch. On the op, you will say that will create more stress for people because I only have 2 years to get a job. So the first year I'll look around for engineering jobs because I studied engineering. But then the second year I'll take any job, okay, because now I'm desperate. So you'll end up being the same thing, okay? So that's the debates in the nutshell, and that's this theme. Keep, you know, close to the capitalist philosophies, right? Don't worry so much about the specific ideas and arguments, which is important. But this whole week and the whole theme is about trying to get you to understand the common approaches when debating any issue with capitalism or any issue with development, right? On government or pro-capitalism is always more open markets, more openness, give more freedom to the individuals to do things there, and then that they will grow. And then growth will spill down. The opposite is too much freedom can be bad. We need to have some control, and that control will help things become more sustainable and help more growth actually and more capital to stay. Okay? That's it for today, guys. Good luck debating about capitalism and national growth strategies.